Right, Job chapter 13, let's call this one chipping away through partiality, or really impartiality might be what Job is calling for his friends to give in this chapter, where he is going to seemingly pick up from where he left off in chapter 12, saying, I have seen all these things. And once again, he's going to repeat, I am not inferior to you, but he says, I would have my day in court before God. Then he is going to turn his attention back to his friends in a number of relatively famous passages. He is going to say, you whitewash with lies, you are worthless physicians. Your silence would be your wisdom. Going back to some things we've alluded to before, Job is going to mix no words in calling them out on those fronts. Now, before he goes on to say, look, will you speak falsely for God? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality toward God or presume to be his advocate and plead his case? When he searches you out, would it be well with you? Or would he potentially find hidden partiality in your heart? And then he's going to seem to point back to Zophar's attempt to spin a phrase or create a proverb back in chapter 11. He's going to say, look, your maxims or your wise phrases are basically just the proverbs of ashes. They mean nothing. They're nonsensical. Reminding me of a time when I used to listen to this group that I liked their music a lot because it sounded great, but I could never make sense of their lyrics. And eventually I found out that their lead singer was writing the lyrics on heroin. And so I spent a lot of time trying to make sense out of nonsensical lyrics. Job, however, is going to quickly catch on to the folly of trying to make sense out of nonsense as he dismisses Zophar's attempts to sound clever as simply ashes. At which point Job is once again going to call for a hearing before God and repeat a famous phrase where he says, though he slay me, still I will trust in him, which is going to be really important for what we see Job say in chapter 14, where it seems that no matter how heavy he feels that God's hand is on him, he's still going to appeal for a removal of the distance between he and God so that they can once again have peace. But in the rest of this chapter, he is going to appeal to God to withdraw his hand from him. So in that hearing that he's calling for, he can speak without fear. Beyond that, he seems to want the hearing so he can get an answer to his yet unanswered questions. Among them, what have I done to draw all of this misery? And why have you made me your enemy? Which seems to be kind of heartbreaking in some ways, because no matter how miserable Job is, he still seems to love and desire a peaceful relationship with God, the one he thinks is torturing him. Something that's going to be indicated in the way he closes out this chapter as he says, look, there's no way I can get out of the boundaries that God has set for me, because God boxes a man in and he has no escape. Something he's essentially repeating from chapter 12, and he's going to say again in another form in chapter 14. But in this chapter, he's going to conclude with a similar sentiment to what he said before when he said he feels like a man who's been poured out like milk to curdle. This time he's specifically going to talk about the ways in which God can leave a man to rot, seemingly talking about the way in which he feels like he is rotting away in his current condition. Something that we have alluded to before, but the thing that probably most caught my attention was the way in which Job caught his friends in this hypocrisy, their apparent love and affection for God, to the point that they seem to be willing to go so far as to lie for God, show partiality to God, and basically be his advocate when he needs none. And here's the irony. Job has been described, as we mentioned, 3 times as a blameless man. 2 times in the first 2 chapters by God himself, he was described that way. And so if Job's friends feel empowered to now take the gloves off and attack a blameless man this way, now that he's been stripped of his honor and his power, the question now becomes, what would they do to a blameless God if they were no longer afraid of him? If they no longer saw God as a power and saw him more as a peer, reminding me of something that Jesus said toward the end of his own ministry in Matthew chapter 5, when he at least twice said, as much as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Understanding that one of the primary messages of Jesus' ministry is that he was God in the flesh, stripped of all of the intimidating power that would cause people to fear, but not stripped of the integrity, the love, and all of the qualities that make him God. And so in some ways, Job seems to have seen through the pretentious affection that his friends seem to have for God, and given us a way to see that their true attitude towards a blameless God might be best seen in the way that they are treating a blameless man.